number of mechanisms have been tried to address this anomaly. We have tried to access the resource at its source and sought to borrow money from the emerging countries that have excess savings. Some of us have been more successful than others in doing so. We should try to do more of that. But we have to realize that we will need additional mechanisms given the scale and scope of the financing gap we face. We have tried to work through the G20 to try to devise a mechanism that would mitigate the perceived risk of lending to Africa and to use international financial institutions to mobilize additional resources for infrastructure investment in Africa from the savings of the emerging countries. But this approach appears to have reached a dead end as a result of the ideologically driven neoliberal onslaught on the African state. As you know, the neoliberal thinking that is dominant in these international financial institutions believes the African state should limit itself to building schools, clinics, and so-called social infrastructure, and leave the rest to the private sector. The only problem with this approach is that we have done exactly that for 30 years. And the result has been the massive gap in infrastructure, and the result has been a massive gap in infrastructural investment that is crippling the prospects of economic growth in our continent. Einstein is supposed to have said, you cannot solve a problem by limiting yourself to the level of thinking that created the problem in the first instance. We cannot solve the gap in infrastructural investment by limiting ourselves to the neoliberal thinking that created the problem in the first instance. And so, while we cannot give up the fight in the G20 to do more through these institutions, we should at the same time seek other alternatives of accessing the global savings. One such option would be to access the savings without third-party intermediation by others, but through multilateral rather than bilateral mechanisms. There are many alternatives for doing that. We have not in the past explored such a possibility, as Africa's engagement with the major savers has been limited to bilateral contacts or continental engagement with one or the other emerging power individually. I believe the time has come for us to broaden our past engagements by approaching the emerging countries as a group to design mechanisms to enable us to directly access their savings for investment in green infrastructure without the mediation of the venerable international financial institutions. There are a few ideas to tackle the challenge. There are a few ideas on the table to tackle the challenge, but I am sure you, the participants in this conference, can come up with more and better alternatives. I wish you success in your deliberations, and thank you for your kind attention.